So kind of the purpose of being here tonight is just sort of talking about what is coding and what does a job as a coder look like. And to me, it's always challenging to figure out the question. I feel like sometimes figuring out the question is actually harder than figuring out the answer, because once you know the question, you sort of have a pathway. But when you don't really know the question, I feel like that's the thing that's really hard, both in life and in development in particular. So that's kind of our aim here today, is to just like figure out that question. Yeah, and welcome to our virtual classroom. This is basically where I hang out all day, is in a Zoom room. So my life has very much become the boxes on a screen, very Brady Bunch style. And big fan of working remote and wearing comfortable pants. I think jeans like 3 times since last week. I love it. And as a company, Learn transitioned to a remote environment, of course, last March. So when we, of course, like every other company, we're like, oh, okay, this is something that we have to do, and we have to do it really quickly. And so this was the space that we decided to go to. It allows us to still interact with each other. It allows us to have as close to an in-person experience as you can have while still being at home wearing comfortable pants. So if you have any questions about Zoom, if you're not familiar with it, I am more than happy to answer any questions there. And I personally really appreciate having the collaborative conversations, and I'm having a conversation with someone, I prefer to see their faces so I don't feel like I'm sitting in my room talking to my computer. So I would definitely encourage you to turn your camera on. It does not bother me if you have a messy room, or if you're eating, or if you have like people or animals hanging out. I love Zoom bombs by pets. So if you are comfortable doing that, I prefer it, just because for me, it feels more comfortable to talk to people than to my computer screen. Yeah, I feel like all bets are off on Zoom. I mean, you're living your life at home, and this is just how we work now. So I feel like as long as you don't take your camera to the bathroom, everything's fine. Everyone else is fine by me. So also, just sort of our COA, our, cover our own butts. This is a public Zoom link that anyone can sign up for. And so we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to keep our meetup space protected and to keep it a positive experience for everybody who shows up here. One of the tenets that we follow at Learn is that we want to create an inclusive and brave space. And so that's the philosophy of where a brave space is a philosophy where everybody is encouraged to grow. And so that means expressing ideas and learning from each other and being okay with having the conversations around things that sometimes are challenging. But that means that everybody has to be respectful. We all have to show respect to each other and each other's paths first and foremost. So it's challenging with care, but never disparaging or causing harm. So it hasn't happened to us, but on this extremely rare or off chance that anybody is disparaging or harmful or showing images or anything that's insulting or inappropriate, if anyone is feeling unsafe, like, we're going to remove that source of harassment, and we will file the appropriate follow-up if we need to. So just want to put that out there, because I want everyone to feel like they're in a comfortable space and that can ask questions and learn. So, all right, well, welcome. So every morning in our virtual classroom, we start the day by having everyone answer kind of like a fun question. So please feel free to open the chat feature, which again is at the bottom of your screen. You should see a little icon for the chat. And please introduce yourself in the chat and answer at least one of these questions, whatever one, or multiple of them if you feel up for it. And just kind of let the group get to know each other a little bit. So yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself in chat. Let us know either like what your current or recent job is, you know, any TV series that we should be binging while we're wrapping up quarantine. Are you a coffee or a tea person? Both, neither? Or one of my favorite questions, miniature version of an animal. We are definitely assuming that no harm would be done to the animal because this is a hypothetical miniature animal. Awesome. So yeah, as those are rolling in, I'll just kind of let you know my answers. My name's Sarah, and I am currently the lead instructor at Learn Academy, which is a web development bootcamp. We are located here in California, but since last March, we've gone virtual. So we're now having students come from all over, which has been really fun. Let's see. So my TV show or movie, I am currently watching old X-File episodes on Hulu, which has been amazing. I do coffee in the morning, tea in the afternoon. And if I could have a tiny pet, I would have a tiny giraffe. It would be so cute to have like a tiny giraffe like hopping around my apartment, going up and down the stairs. That would be the best. Great. Awesome. I love these answers. A lemur, yes. You'd go tiny lemur. I love it. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for sharing, everyone. I appreciate it. All right. Well, just before we jump in, a little bit more about me. My name's Sarah, and I am an instructor at Learn. And I really like talking about this because I was a student at Learn. Prior to working at Learn, I worked in restaurants for a really long time. I was a bartender and a server and a manager, and I did all the different stuff that you can do in a restaurant. But I was, it's obviously it's not a career. It's a job that you can make pretty good money at, but it's definitely not something that is particularly, it doesn't use your brain a lot. Like your brain was like, it's definitely you're a hat rack at that point. You're not really interacting with a lot of complex thoughts. And so I came to Learn hoping to just find my next thing, to find my passion. And I feel really lucky that I was able to do that. So I'm speaking to you from a place of experience that I was in your shoes not terribly long ago. And this process of going through Learn has been one of the best things that I've ever done. Absolutely has changed my life, and I'm really just couldn't be happier about it. But one of the other reasons that I really like doing this meetup is that one of our missions at Learn is to just help build the tech community in San Diego. And so one of the ways we do that is hosting meetups like this, of just saying like, hey, like we want to just offer our knowledge and our experience to anybody who's particularly interested. And for me, as coming into tech from a non-tech background, I always struggled with the breakdown of like, how can you take this thing that's really complex and explain it to somebody who's brand new? And that's really become my passion. Like I want to be really good at that. I want Learn to be really good at that. And I want a lot more people in the world to be really good at doing that, at breaking these things down into simpler terms. And so a couple of years ago, we were kind of throwing around this idea of like, how can we do a meetup that's just like breaking all of this down to being that really like available type of language for people who are just interested in development, but again, like don't really know what the question is. Like, what is like, is the question, what is coding? Is the question, what does a job look like? How do we break that down, get rid of assumptions of knowledge, don't scare away people who may feel intimidated or a little unsure about what this is supposed to be? And so TJ and I were sitting in a staff meeting at Learn, and we were like trying to like workshop this idea. And our boss, Rob Kaufman, just like laughed, and he was like, oh, so you want to explain what the fuck coding is? And we all cracked up, and we were like, yes, that's exactly what we want to do. And so jokingly, the name stuck, and that's what we've named our workshop ever since. So that's kind of my goal here, is that I want to talk about coding in a way that anyone can find understandable. I try to think of it in terms of like explaining my job to my mom. And to be clear, that's not a diss on my mom. She's a very smart lady, but it's just the big picture goal of this meetup. So it's the sort of 10,000 foot view of what coding is and what does that look like going from the beginning into a job as a developer. All right. So coming from a job at a restaurant, I feel extra special, lucky to be here working in this virtual space, because restaurant jobs are not something that you can do virtually. I came into coding at a time that didn't feel like a pressure situation because of the world that was going on around us, but a lot of my students are feeling that now. So I have a lot of students who lost their jobs due to COVID, and we're like, well, I can't go back to that industry. It's the thing that laid me off. And so how do I move forward from here? And that was a really big challenge of trying to help people move into a tech career during a time when there are so many industries that are really struggling. And so I feel lucky to be here, and I feel really lucky that we've had a lot of students have success in making this transition into coding. So I won't sugarcoat how hard it is to learn development. It's really, really challenging. Programming is hard, and communicating about programming is really difficult. You have to learn a new vocabulary, and you have to learn a new logical approach to problem solving. And working through that idea can be really hard. And there's this concept, oops, sorry, let me go back. There's this concept called rubber ducking, where if you're trying to figure out the question, again, it always goes back to that. It's like, what's a good question to ask? And when you're trying to figure that out, there's this concept called rubber ducking. And the idea is that you sort of problem solve out loud, and it can help you reframe the question or find holes in your logic. And so programmers often like have something nearby that they can talk to. So I have a little rubber duck on my desk. And at Learn, we have this giant inflatable rubber duck that's kind of our Learn mascot. And so it's sort of a joke that, talking about the questions out loud can help you reframe how you think about them. But I think that that's a really important thing, and why I like to have these things be more conversational. So if at any point, you want to ask questions or direct the conversation in a particular way, please let me know. Because coding is hard. It's something that you really have to commit yourself to entirely, but it's doable. And I want to make sure that I'm doing my part to make the barrier of entrance as low as possible, because technology needs all of you, and technology needs diversity in every possible way. It needs input from all the people who use technology, which today is everybody. And there's a point in the recent past when technology was made and used by a very small group of people. And the people making technology were very, very smart, but predominantly younger white men. And we look back at that and we thank them for their contributions, that we wouldn't be here without them. But technology can't be exclusionary like that anymore. It's too important. As a society, we have to open this field to everybody, and it's too important not to. Coding is in our everyday lives. It's in our cars and our medical devices. It's in credit cards and all of our entertainment, and of course, smartphones and all the apps that keep us functioning in the world. It's, if you're going to apply for a job or get unemployment or open a bank account or rent an apartment, all of those things require technology. Everything is done online. And so technology is not a luxury item. It's critical to the daily functioning of our lives. And so that's the world that I want to work towards, is that everybody feels comfortable talking about technology and contributing to technology. And I want to make it more inclusive. And so to do that, we have to break it down to the smallest level and figure out what that question is. So let's do that together and figure out what the F coding is. All right. So when I first started learning about coding, I was, telling my friends and my family, and I got a lot of mixed responses because some people thought that I was learning medical coding, or some people asked me if I was like building computers and learning binary, and it's not really either of those things. Generally speaking, we talk about people being developers, but the term developer is incredibly broad. But generally what that means, what all of these things are referring to, is creating software. And sometimes it can be referred to as being a dev or a software engineer or a full stack developer, front-end developer. But most commonly as a developer, you are using languages that were written by other people in order to create new things. And so within the broad term software, at Learn, we focus specifically on web development, meaning the software that we are writing is specifically accessed through the internet. So we're creating web applications. The same types of software can be used to create apps and, like mobile apps. The same types of software can be used to create like desktop applications. I mean, like, Microsoft Word is still a software that is written in some of these languages that already exist that then get put together in a particular way to create that piece of software. But we focus generally on the languages that create web applications. And the general difference between a web application and a web page is, does the user log in? Does that service save information about the user and allow the user to create content for themselves within that service? So if I go to a website of a restaurant, I can look at the menu and I can see the location and I can see information about the business. The interaction is me reading the page. And so to me, I kind of classify that as a web page. And if I go to a website like Zoom, I can create an account, I can schedule meetings, and my information is then stored by Zoom. And so that to me is a web application. And then same concept with mobile, slightly different tools. But learning to build static web pages where the interaction between the web page and the user is predominantly just reading information, it is great. It's an incredibly useful tool because every website, every business needs a website. If you're a business and you don't have a website, you don't have a business. But what we're talking about here at Learn is building web applications. So things that you sign into that stores your content, because that's the more complex parts that require database interactions and this idea of full stack development. So why learn these things? In the early days of my cohort at Learn, when I was a student, we, of course, were all asked, like, well, why do you want to learn these? And this is kind of an aggregated list of what my cohort came up with. And so I like this list, and I think it's true of, to some extent, of every cohort I've been a part of since then. And so I just kind of wanted to share them because these are really cool things about becoming a developer and being in tech and being involved with development, is that it's challenging because you will never know everything about development. It just isn't possible. I work with people who've been programming for 25 years and they don't know it all. And they'll definitely be the first person to tell you that they don't know it all, and you won't either. And that's kind of a double-edged sword because it can feel really overwhelming when you're first learning and you're just like, there's so much out here. How am I ever going to learn this? But when you realize that you just can't ever know it all, it's kind of freeing, and it's it's kind of amazing because then you can always learn more. There's always something else out there for you to take a hold of. It's also, I mean, it's constant problem solving, but more importantly, it's really creative problem solving, because there's no right answer when it comes to development. There's an answer that works, and there's better answers than others, but the answer that works is the right answer. It's also the idea of having a practical and a functional and a wanted trade is really neat, because I think that's where a lot of people are struggling with, like, careers where you're doing a job, but it feels really connected to the company you're working for. And if that company or that industry is no longer a thing, what do you do then? And so the idea of learning a skill like web development is that there's so much need for it. There's so many people who are looking for this skill set. And so not only are you very much in demand, but you also can create things and have this tangible outcome. It's a skill that's not limited by industry anymore, which is kind of cool. The ability to create is a huge one. I see so many people that come to code from like an artistic background because they're the people who just like have these ideas in their head and they just need to like get them out to make them real. And code allows you to do that. It's a very creative trade. It's something that you're allowed to express yourself and see your ideas come to life. And I think that that's really powerful as well. It's fun to see how many artists I have come through to learn. And one of my favorites, organizational skills. You have to have a very organized mind to be a developer. Your code base and your file structure can be huge. And you're also having to manage a lot of different tasks. And so it's incredibly important to be detail oriented. Spaces matter, matching curly braces matter. And so it's so much attention to detail and having really efficient, organized systems, which I personally love. I also really love the idea of this, that coding is a universal language. And so coding languages themselves often use English words, but everybody across the world uses the same coding languages. And so you can have a team, and often this is a really normal practice for even medium to large size companies, where they'll have teams that live, across the world, so that someone's always working, right? When one group is sleeping, the other people are working. And so if there's issues, somebody is always attentive to that code base. And the idea that like the teams are all working on the same product, they have the same, team that's overseeing them. Their locations are different in order to collaborate to make the same product. And I think that's really cool. So even though you may not speak the same language as your coworkers, like day to day, you're still communicating together through this universal language of development, which I think is pretty cool. And then this was true before the pandemic, but is definitely even more true now. There are opportunities everywhere in the world. And more importantly, like remote opportunities everywhere in the world. There's a lot of people who are moving away from Silicon Valley for the first time because they don't have to live in that expensive place anymore. You can live wherever you have an internet connection, and you can work for a company wherever, which is amazing. I mean, I'm so interested to see what the kind of like the, I don't know what to call it, I guess like the demographics of like big cities. I'm curious how that's going to change over the next couple of years when all of a sudden the tech centers are just a little bit less important, and the work that's being done and the contribution of the employees becomes much more valuable as this like opens up and changes throughout the world. I think the next couple of years are going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And lastly, it's artistic and it's beautiful, and you can make beautiful things with code. There's a lot of digital art mediums and all of that, but the code itself, the actual code that you're writing, can be really beautiful. Like you'll run across a code snippet and it will just be like so concise and so perfectly doing exactly what it needs to do. And it's really cool. It's just like the code can be beautiful and then you make beautiful things with it. So that's my list of whys. But the big one that I think is so important is understanding the technology that we use every day. Because like I said, like, I mean, you all know, like if you need to do something, you're going first to your phone or your computer. I mean, everything we do is you're looking it up on your phone before you travel somewhere. You know, you're checking if the item exists at the grocery store before you go. Like everything is dependent on technology, and so few people understand the things that we are dependent on to function every day. And so I love this quote, because a lot of people just like don't know and therefore underappreciate. And so I think it's really cool to see people go through the process of learning and all of a sudden have this giant new respect for like the apps that you use every day. Or all of a sudden you're like, oh, like there's a lot of hate on this one buggy video game, and all of a sudden like I don't care anymore. Like I get it, it's hard. So it's peeking behind the curtain in a really cool way. Anyone have any questions or comments? All right, so let's get into programming languages. So programming languages are a lot like any other language. Developers use languages that were created by other people to create new things. So like writing, you know, a story, you're taking words that already exist and you're putting them together in a new, unique way, and you're telling your own version of this story. And just like in the English language, we have established words and grammar and punctuation and all of this stuff that makes the language understandable, and code has that exact same thing. There's vocabulary inside of code. There's keywords that are built into the language. There's a sentence structure to it where all the pieces have to be in order. And there's syntax. There's lots of curly braces and parentheses and all of this stuff that makes the code readable in a proper way based on the language that somebody else has designed. And then we get to take all of those pieces, put them together, and tell our own story. And ultimately, the goal of code is communication, which is kind of twofold, because one, the obvious goal is that we are creating pieces of software to communicate to the computer an action that you want to perform. And computers are they're inflexible machines. They don't get nuance. They don't get the thing you were trying to do. They do exactly what you've told them. And so communicating exactly your intention to a computer is, of course, step one. But the other one, and kind of the more important one to me, is this idea that your code has to communicate your intent to other human beings, because you're not the only one working on this code most of the time. Your code is serving a greater purpose, and you have a team that's contributing to it. And if your code that you write is unreadable, nobody is going to go spend the time to fix it when inevitably it needs updates, because technology marches forward. Updates have to happen all the time. And so even if you wrote really great code, but it's not readable to a human, then it's going to be thrown out and someone's going to rewrite it. And so essentially your code did not do its job of communication to the computer at some point when somebody just says, delete it and start over. There's kind of a joke that no one is a worse developer than you 6 months ago. So we are constantly trying to make sure that our code is understandable so that when someone else looking back, including you, can understand the intent, understand the purpose, and move the code forward. So more specifically about coding languages is that in the broad terms of the language, or I guess the broad terms of development, it can be broken down into sort of two main components. And those main components are the front end and the back end. And so the front end, which is sometimes referred to as client-side development, is basically all the stuff the user sees and interacts with on a web page. So the front end is both the UI, which stands for user interface, and the user experience, or the UX. And in large companies, you will have teams of people that are in charge of each of these pieces. But basically, the UI is the visual aspect of the page. Is it nice to look at? Is it pleasing to the eye? Is it on brand for a business? And so I think of the UI as kind of like the art major of development. This is really where people excel who are fantastic with colors and symmetry and branding. I mean, there's a lot of marketing that goes into UI as well, of creating this thing that is pleasant to look at and represents the business. And then the other part of the front end is the UX. The user experience is the user able to use the application? Is there an ease and a flow with which the user can navigate? And is it intuitive? Can the user reach the desired features that your app is intending? So I think of UX as sort of like the sociology major of development, right? Like, can you get people's behavior to match what you're intending when it comes to the application? So the main languages that create every web page that you look at are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we're going to talk about those in just a minute, but those three are sort of like the trilogy of the web. These are the things that make the websites that we see. And so the other sort of major component of languages is the backend, which is also sometimes referred to as server-side development. And this is all of the code that's sort of under the hood. So this is what allows web apps to save information and render that information when requested by the user. And so the backend is storage content and data structures. So it's kind of the engineering major of development, where it's how do you correctly and efficiently store information and then have it be returned to the user at the appropriate time with the appropriate speed. So just like the front end, there's many languages that can be and are used for backend development. At Learn, we use a framework called Ruby on Rails. So it's a framework called Rails that's written in a language called Ruby. But you'll see a lot of other backend languages that are particularly popular. Python is really popular. Node.js is really popular. .NET is popular. There's a language called Java, which is popular for mobile development, which interestingly should not be confused with JavaScript, which is one of the trilogies of the front end of development. But it's kind of a funny story because the guy who invented JavaScript, it was like mid-90s, like 95 or so. And he had invented this and he originally called it Netscape. And then it was like, okay, but he was trying to figure out a better name for this new technology that he had created in just like a couple of weeks. Crazy smart guy. And he looked around and he was like, okay, well, all these coffee names are really popular right now. And there's this programming language, Java, that's like blowing everybody up. It's super popular. And he was like, maybe I can steal a little of that thunder. And so he named his programming language JavaScript, even though there was a Java language that already exists. And it totally worked. He totally stole Java's thunder. And now JavaScript is one of the most popular programming languages there is. Like everyone has, if you're going to be a developer, you have to learn JavaScript. So kind of funny story. But anyway, so backend development is where the data lives. It's the under the hood code that everyone relies on, but you don't see as a user. So we've got our front end, we've got our back end. They both consist of lots of different languages that are creating these two things. But how do they communicate? How do we get all of this in combination to a visual thing that we see. So we'll take a quick venture into the internet. And again, this is pretty clearly oversimplified. This is the 10,000 foot view. People spend like their entire careers getting like PhDs in things that we are just like glossing over. So this is a very high level, and the internet basically is the largest machine on Earth. So it's this huge thing that we rely on every day, but it's technically just all one thing. I like to think of it as like there's like a colony of quaking aspens, I think in like Utah, and somebody learned recently that all of their roots are connected, and that it's actually just one organism. And they're all related, and it's like it spans this like, you know, acres. And I think that's really, I mean, it's really amazing. And I kind of think that the internet's sort of like that, where we see the individual trees all over the place, but we don't really like always consider the fact that they're all connected. A computer is on the internet because it's connected to other computers, and so it's on that tree of life, and that's what makes it so powerful, is that it is all connected. But basically they're just tubes. They're tubes that connect us all over the world. And I particularly like this map because this shows all of the pipes that run through the oceans, which I think is really crazy to think about. But ultimately, I mean, it's just our computers like connected to other computers, and a computer that we use has a bunch of like, you know, user interface. There's a keyboard and the screen so that we can interact with it. But ultimately, the raw machine parts are just capable of storing information. And so all over the world, there's these computers that have all the user pieces stripped away that are just storing content, and those are called servers. It's just very efficient ways. It's computers that have been stripped away to really efficiently store code. And so our computer is connected to every other computer, connected to these servers that whose job it is to store content. And really that's what the internet is, which is really amazing. And so when we create websites, we are hosting them, we are putting our website and storing the code on a server, and a server that connects to the internet. And so you can make requests to all of these different servers that store content and then get it back. And they just travel along these little tubes. So this is just another little side note, but this little machine is the thing that lays the cables on the ocean ground, which I just think is adorable. And I appreciate these people whose job it is to go out into the ocean and lay internet cables so that we can talk on Zoom. But basically, these requests and responses are the thing that make the internet. We as a user of the internet hits enter on a URL, and we send out a request. And it goes to the place where that code is stored and then returns with the content, and that populates our screen. And this happens so many times and so incredibly quickly that if it doesn't happen quickly, users will leave. Like nobody waits more than, it's like 3 seconds for a web page to load. I think it's more than half. Yeah, like 57% of people will not wait for a site to load. And that's all the job of the developer, is to create these requests and responses really efficiently so that when a user hits enter on the URL of their page, this request goes out to a server through the tubes of the internet and comes back really quickly. So to dig in just a little bit deeper to this request response cycle, it breaks down just a little bit further and into 2 parts for each request response. So the request part is me hitting enter on a URL, and where it goes depends on the location of the server where that information is stored. And the location of the server is wrapped up in the URL. And so that URL that we have in the search bar determines or knows where that code is stored. And so there's many processes of translating that into machine readable way of designating that address of the code. But what also goes out is an action. What type of request are you making? And that determines the type of information you get back. So it hits the server and then it sends content back. And what we get back is a status code just saying, how did this request and response go? And then we also get payload. So location maps to an IP address. An IP address is where that code is actually stored. And IP addresses are all in break down to these sets of 4 numbers that are between 0 and 255. And the reason it's 255 is that all breaks down into one single like unit of binary. It holds up to 8 binary digits, which maps to us as the numbers 0 to 255. So basically, what we're doing is translating something that's human readable that we can search for in the URL to something that is readable by the computer. So again, this idea of communication between a human and a computer. After that, along with that, we found the location, and then we're also sending an action. And an action can be one of 4 things, and they are summed up by the adorable acronym CRUD. And the CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. So those are the 4 actions that you could potentially do on a web page. So if you're a user on a web app, meaning you can log in and create information, you can log in, you can create a user name, you can, like my example earlier from Zoom, you can create a meeting. This is an action that is taken and stored on the server. And that has to be dictated by the developer in this URL or in this process of making a request. Read is just, hey, I want to see information back on the page. Update and delete, of course, perform the appropriate actions. So we get there, we've found the information, or we've found the place where that code lives. We've given it the correct instructions. And then what comes back is the response code, which is 2 parts, the response, which is 2 parts, a code and a payload. And response codes are basically tools that developers use to provide information about the request response cycle. And every single request gets a response. Sometimes those responses are successes and sometimes they are not. But by giving those responses specific codes, developers can tell their application what to do. Because if a response code says, hey, you're good, we can go ahead and load the page. But if not, if something goes wrong, we should tell our users that there's a problem rather than just leaving them with a blank page or a broken application of some kind. There's this really adorable website that gives cat pictures for all of the different response codes. So a 200 is, it's fine. It's a response code that means like, hey, go ahead and load the page, but it's telling you that there's no content coming with the page. And so that means that it was probably a create action. So this is kind of a cute meme. A 400 level response is an error code, meaning that something went wrong. So in this case, the request entity too large. But a really common one that you will see is a 404. I'm sure all of you have come across this at some point. It's sort of the catch-all of something went wrong error codes. But the reason that we have these is because developers are responsible for what happens even when their code doesn't work as intended or something is wrong with the server. And so response codes is, or creating an experience for your user, even if something went wrong, is called coding for the unhappy path. Meaning it didn't work out, but you still have to make your user want to hang out on your page. And so something like this is the GitHub error page. It's still kind of cute. It's engaging with the user. You don't feel like you broke the application. And it also, more importantly, gives you a bunch of links and a search bar to get back on the right track. And so that's an important part of development as well, is not only what happens when you're coding something and it turns out exactly the way you expect, but what happens when it doesn't. So then we made the response or the request, we got to where we wanted. Response comes back with a code, but the other part of the response, as long as everything is the code says that we're all good, is that we get the payload. And so the payload in most cases, well, in pretty much all cases, is wrapped around inside of HTTP, which is the hypertext transfer protocol. And what we get back is the markup language HTML. So going back to our 3 fundamental front-end internet languages, HTML is number 1. Everything you see on a website, on a mobile, all of it is wrapped up and delivered inside of HTML. So HTML, hypertext markup language. This is the words on a page. Everything you see is wrapped inside of HTML. I like to think of it as like the skeleton that holds up a web page. It's like the nouns of a language. But this idea, the HTML really came about kind of in conjunction with this whole request response cycle. In the early days of the internet, this was very young and it was fairly unregulated, and people who were using different types of technology couldn't communicate the same way. And so a very smart computer scientist named Tim Berners-Lee, who was working at CERN, created this idea of standardizing this interaction to say, hey, everybody that makes these requests and responses should be able to get back the same information. And so in standardizing this, what his team came up with was the World Wide Web. And so HTML was the first language that worked on the web and that would work on all computers as long as they were part of this internet system, as long as they were connected to this big internet machine. So pretty cool. But basically HTML is a way of displaying content. So there's these sets of tags that just tell the computer how to display the information. And so the tags are read by the computer and everything inside the tags is put onto the screen. And what you do with the tags as a developer can influence the look of what's being presented. So HTML is, I mean, it's fundamental. It's so important. If you have any interest in learning development, this is absolutely where to start. It's typically pretty accessible. You can actually play around with it even in your browser, but it is absolutely like the fundamentals of any kind of programming. There's clearly a lot more to go from there, but that is the thing that we ask all of our students to have a working knowledge of as they come into the boot camp. So the next thing we talked about in the trilogy of languages that create the user side of the internet is CSS. This stands for cascading style sheets. And basically it is the thing that makes your code look pretty. So without CSS, every single web page will look like it fell out of the 90s. And if anyone is here is old enough to remember having a MySpace page, if you could like go in and like edit your HTML and CSS on your MySpace page, and like that's what you're doing, is you were changing the appearance. And so CSS targets the HTML. So HTML is the stuff that puts things on the page, and then CSS targets those tags that are read by the computer and then changes and influences the way that the material is presented or put onto the browser. And so between the two of those, that's what makes our static page. That's what makes the page that the user can read and view information. CSS is sort of notoriously finicky. And so this meme is sort of making a joke at that. And because HTML and CSS is on every web page that you see, you can actually look at that in the browser. And actually, if you don't mind, maybe we can do that really fast. Let me just open up another browser tab. This is super cool if you're learning web development and you just kind of want to get a handle on like what's going on. You can actually go into a browser. I use Chrome because they have really good developer tools. But if you right click, or for Mac, it's control click, you get this little pop-up window, and you can go down to the tab that says inspect. And if you click that, you'll open this window that will give you, it'll show you actually the source code of HTML and CSS that's on the website that you're looking at. And so these are these tags, these opening and closing tags inside of the carets. And this is all the code that makes this Google page. It's the markup code, which is pretty cool. And then down here in this lower window is all of the stylings. So this is the stylings that's targeting a particular tag in the HTML, and then it's passing it styling attributes to modify the look of that tag. And it's funny too, because then actually like you can use this as kind of a sandbox where you can actually modify by like removing certain stylings. Like if I removed that styling, the font here changed because I'm taking off the thing that Google like added in order to influence that particular look. It doesn't change. I didn't hack Google. If I refresh, it comes back. But it's a really good place where as a developer, you can actually go in and like do quick stylings and be like, okay, what's actually going on here, and kind of poke around at your page. But as somebody who's learning development, it's a really cool way to see how web pages are put together. And just, again, go back to that appreciation of like how much work it takes to create something. Like this Google, I mean, like, sure, like we all know Google is great, but their homepage is pretty plain. But you look at it and you realize like it's plain to us, but what's going on behind the scenes is a lot of stuff. It's carrying a lot of weight. And so it's kind of cool to do that. And you can do this on any page. So you could pull up a Wikipedia page and just start clicking around and seeing like, okay, there's all these different places that are like all these different sections of the page, and that they're all laid out in a particular way. And if you click on, you hover over certain containers, the corresponding piece will highlight on the page. Let me find a good one. They're all kind of, yeah, that's the big one. That's like the big body of the page. But you can see like, okay, well, this container, this div container, which is just an HTML tag, is holding all of the content that we see within that blue square. I can probably click open and look at smaller pieces of it inside. Yeah, there we go. So I don't know, it's kind of fun. And I think it's pretty amazing. And this is also really cool that it's just available to you in your browser. So anyway, developer tools are fantastic. They're really good. We use them all the time for bug fixing and for looking at issues with our code, but it's also really fun just to kind of play around with. All right, so HTML, CSS are two main languages that create the views of a web page. But there's that third pillar that's the three things you have to know if you're going to be a front-end developer. And the third one is JavaScript. And so JavaScript is the power language. HTML and CSS are the foundation of everything that we see, but they just create a view. JavaScript is the is a different category of language because it is a logical language, meaning that it allows the application to react to a user. When you click a button and you see something change on your page, that's JavaScript. And so it's kind of like the muscle on our skeleton that allows for movement and for interaction with our page. And because JavaScript's job is to manipulate data, it's very particular about how it processes the data. And so JavaScript has categories of information that it'll work with. And these categories are called data types. And there's roughly 7 categories of data type, and I won't nitpick about all of those right now, but the ones that if you're getting into web development that you want to be familiar with off the bat are the data types of strings, numbers, and Booleans. Strings are collections of characters that are stored inside of quotation marks. And strings have particular properties. They have a length property. You can tell how many characters are inside of a string. They also have the ability to identify particular characters within that set. And then numbers are exactly what you think they are. But the number data type allows us to perform mathematical functions. It allows us to compare values. But there's the breakdown of both whole numbers and then partial numbers, which are called floats, but all still fall under the category of number. And then another data type is a Boolean value. So Booleans are true false values, and they can be used for logical comparisons. So for example, if I was comparing the numbers 6 and 3, I can make that comparison about numbers because one is going to be greater than the other. But what I get back from that comparison is a Boolean value. So I would return, it would return to me either a true or a false value. And in JavaScript, we can take those data types and store them so that we can access that information more easily. And doing that is called creating a variable. So just like in like math class where you could say x equals 6, and then you reference x, but really what you are referring to is the value that it was assigned to x. And so developers do the same thing. You can store anything in a variable as long as it's a data type that JavaScript recognizes. But the idea of storing content in variables and then manipulating the variables is creating a level of abstraction where as a developer, you're manipulating a variable and then that variable can be manipulated and called something else, but you're having to track this logical progression of, okay, well, it started as this data type, but now it gets called this, and then it gets modified and now it's called this, and it's broken down into a couple different pieces and it's called this. And tracking that process, kind of that thread throughout your code is a really important part of development. So dealing with variables and abstraction is important. So that's sort of the high level overview of actual development. Talking about the languages, talking about how they interact with the internet, how they interact with each other, which sort of brings us to the next phase of sort of like putting this all together into like, what does this mean for a career? But before I move on, does anyone have any questions on any of the programming languages or how they interact, or any of the data types, HTML, what we can do in the browser, any of that stuff? Cool. So if you're wanting to learn development, you're interested, all of the things of all of the whys are interesting to you, You're sort of figuring out that question still of like, what is coding? How do I apply it to, how do I make that a job? How do I make that a thing that I do every day? And there's a bunch of different ways to get there. The sort of common ones are, of course, that you start watching stuff on YouTube, get lucky, and move into a job. Some people, of course, choose to go a more traditional route of going through school, and then of course there's a boot camp option. But all of these are sort of the path to like, how do I make this my job? So being self-taught, there's so many people who do this and it's awesome. There's really, really cool resources online, and a bunch of them are free or really, really affordable. There's a whole bunch of online courses. And I've had a friend that will like on the side, like do a series of Udemy videos that like is, for $10 or something, you have access to all this information, and it's super cool. Definitely cost effective, and a lot of people can kind of do this in their spare time to like get up and running on being a self-taught programmer. And I definitely recommend that no matter what your interest level is, start here. Take some online classes and watch some YouTube videos and see if this is the thing that you want to do. It will definitely either pique your interest or you'll be like, nope, too much, like not for me. The other side of this, of people moving into this career, is going to school. There's lots of different options. There's of course like the classic 4-year computer science degree, but there's also people that are coming out of like more community college classes with associate's degrees in like computer engineering and things like that mid-level point where you can either transfer to a 4-year degree, or just move into the job market. And so there's a lot of availability even within this more traditional approach that I think is really cool. I've definitely had a lot of students who either have gone through computer science degrees or have like taken some computer science classes and then figured out like, yes, this is what I want to do, because they just get excited about the concepts. But it's definitely like, it's a lot of heavy theory and it's a lot of like very big picture thinking, which is super important. Then of course, there's the good old route of boot camp, which obviously I'm an advocate of because I work for Learn and also that was my path. So clearly I'm biased, but honestly, it's a really great way to learn. But I also think that is not the only way. Where I think you should absolutely learn on your own for a little while, do those tutorials and see if you get excited. And if you have the opportunity to take classes like computer science classes in college, even if you just take like one class through an online community college, again, you're going to learn a lot of theory and stuff that's really valuable. But if you want to really dig in, I mean, boot camps are awesome. There's so many boot camps. I'm not even like, ours is definitely one. It's not for everybody, but there are really, really great options. And it's definitely faster and more cost effective than going the college route if that's the way you want to go. So once you've done your learning and you're kind of looking more at like, what's my end goal? There's so many different careers that are really cool as well. I mean, I went through this path. I'm not a developer every day because my job is being an instructor, but it's my job to be involved in the development community and to learn about development every day. And that's just like one example of how you can work in a development job. There's a lot of need for people who are really good at processing data. We are now as humans really, really good at collecting data and not so good at interpreting it. And so if you have a passion for like breaking down, like taking lots of information and making it meaningful, like organizing it and categorizing it, data science, look into Python. All of those things can lead to really great careers. And if you're a person who's like making this transition from another industry, I feel you because I did it. And it's hard when you're coming from something. I mean, I came from a very non-technical background working in a restaurant. I studied psychology in college. Like I had nothing technical in my background. But we talk a lot at Learn about transferable skills because again, like coding is communication. it's communication with your computer, but it's communication with humans. And working on a team and just being someone who can connect with other people is so important. And it's such a skill that is needed in technology. And again, the idea that that when you're dealing with an industry that is so prevalent, that is used by so many people in so many different ways and so important in our society, there's so much more that is needed from each individual person's perspective of how does this impact your life? How does it impact you differently than maybe the person sitting next to you? And all of these things are important to collaborate together and important to take into account when we're looking at what's the next generation of people working in tech. We need people who have backgrounds in different industries in order to make the tech of that industry more significant and better. So there's so many skills that are really important as you're looking at a tech job. I particularly with my students, of people who come from non-technical backgrounds, I mean, from like people who are in like retail and, you know, in restaurants and like office jobs that didn't have a lot of technical aspects to it. Like I speak all the time to them about how do you manage your how do you think about yourself as a developer, and you think about yourself through these transferable skills. So organization, communication, you know, working as a manager or leading a team, being just a generally good person, being able to create documentation, being able to organize a schedule. All of these things are incredibly important in tech, and also have been learned in different industries as you come in. So don't discount even the smallest thing as you're making this journey into technology. Transferable skills, they are important. Cool. The awesome thing about getting into tech is that the ceiling is very high. I often have students who, you know, started whatever career they intended to start, and they got a couple years in and they realized either there wasn't growth, or the growth was very small, or it was going to take them years and years and years to get anywhere. And they just kind of became disillusioned with that industry because they're like, this isn't a good option for me. There's nothing I can do with this. And so they start looking into like, how do I take that transferable skill and move into tech? And the cool thing is, like, I mean, not only is there so much you can do, but you can grow in tech for so long, and they need people who are willing to make that commitment. Senior developers are very much in demand because, again, there's so much tech that's needed, and junior developers are starting, like, as a community, we're starting to grow through these online resources and going to boot camps. But moving quickly and learning quickly and moving into that senior level position will move you up in salary really significantly, and you can take a lot of jobs and have a lot of opportunities at that point, which is very cool. And fortunately, you can get there pretty quickly compared to a lot of other industries. So time to plug our stuff. If you're interested by this, we have lots more meetups. Check out our meetup page. We do a ton of these for free or for very inexpensive, but we also have our 3-day program where we dig into HTML, CSS, JavaScript, the trilogy of things you have to know as a developer. And we do like a full program. So we do, it's Friday evenings, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And we dig into these concepts. We treat it exactly like we treat our full-time program, where we're in the class, we're doing live lecturing and coding examples, and then our students build out a project over the course of the 3 days. So it's a really cool example to just, again, see, like, is this, oops, sorry, pulled out my earbud. Is this something that I like? Is this something that I'm excited by? And just check it out at a fairly low cost to you. Another one, this one is free or very, very cheap, similar to this meetup where we're doing a build your first website. where we're going to focus on HTML. So just like brand new beginners who are getting a taste for how these things all fit together. How do you build out the structure of a page? And then we'll apply a CSS library, which is like one subset of that styling that's really popular right now. It's called Bootstrap, and just a way to style your page with some pre-made styled components, which is pretty cool. So that is what, that's not this Saturday, but next Saturday. So check that out. It's from 10 to 2. And the other one we're doing, again, was just like, it's our community meetup. We do a lot of these at Learn because we are very connected to our community. And so we're doing one with people who have gone through our program, who are veterans, who have made the transition into web development. So we're just doing kind of AMA style, like ask me anything, which these events are always really fun. Love getting a chance to catch up with our alum. But yeah, this QR code will take you to our meetup page where we list all of our stuff. So check that out if you would like to. And then I am very open for questions, anything more about like my experience, about Learn, about just being a developer in general, about how to get started. I can tell you other random weird trivia about web development. I'm up for it all. And please feel free. Oh, that's some of my sources. Cat codes. Check out cat codes. They're super fun. This is super cool. Oops, I clicked the wrong thing. There is a web page that's dedicated to CSS, so like the designing of a web page, and they give this template, which is this home page. They just say, take the HTML of this page, which is just that the tags, and then take it and style it however you want. And so this is sort of their template. And then these are different ways that people have taken the exact same code, but just by changing the look, have created these different pages. So this is pretty cool. Oh, this one, I love this one. So this is the same base code. Like if you inspected the page, you know, if you do the right click and there we go, look at this markup, it doesn't change, but the look of the page is just incredible. These have like little hover effects. I just think that's the coolest thing. So anyway, lots you can do with web development to be very creative. But this is me. Feel free to reach out. And again, I'm open for questions or playing around with anything that interests you.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. This was an awesome presentation. I know I learned a few things myself, even though we've been doing this presentation quite a few times, I still learned something new. So thank you for all of that. I threw a couple of things in chat. I just wanted to make sure we knew I'm recording the presentation. So I'm going to share out the link to the recording to everybody in some follow-up. I'm going to send out the links to all these great events we have coming up, as well as Jumpstart. And then for coming tonight, you have a nice little promo code that'll do a nice little discount for Jumpstart. So I'm going to send out all that info probably tomorrow and get that out. So please, before we go though, if you have any last minute questions, I see we had a few more come in. So the time is yours. So please just let me know if you have any questions.
I'm super open to.
There was one question, Sarah. One person was interested. when we were going to begin on in-person learning. I know I mentioned a little bit about that, but maybe you have a few thoughts on what our strategy is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting. Obviously, nobody is really able to, or this obviously threw everyone for a loop. No one was able to really predict this, and we'd always been an in-person class, and we had to do this very quick pivot remote. And we kind of talked about it as a team, and we were just trying to figure out, like, what does the future look like for us? Because we have been able to really learn a lot by going remote, and we've been able to be a little bit more inclusive than we were before, which is something that's really important to us as a team. People who are stay-at-home parents, or even just partially, at-home parents, or I had students who have like immunocompromisations that they were like able to attend the class, and so we were like, man, like we don't want to lose that, but we also really miss being in person. So to be honest, we're kind of still figuring it out, because this is sort of new territory that we hadn't expected to be in. But at this point, our idea moving forward is to do some kind of hybrid, where the learning will still predominantly be in a virtual medium, where we can allow people to attend no matter like what their circumstances, but that we want to still offer a communal space for people who are in San Diego who need like a co-working space or outlet, or internet, or whatever the thing is. So we're at this point still, we may not go back entirely in person, but we're honestly still kind of figuring it out. And part of we want to stay in a situation where what we are doing is mirroring what the industry is doing, because we consider ourselves like a job training program. The point that the reason that we're here is that we want to be able to allow people who are in a job that they're not happy with transition into tech and have a place to do that and a place to learn. And so we do a ton of focus on the job training side of things, both with the tech and coding and communication and all that, but with actual like resume work and creating portfolios and all that as well. And so our whole thing is that we want to be relevant to the tech industry. And right now, the tech industry is staying virtual. All of the big companies are saying like, we're not going back. So at this point, we're going to stay in that hybrid setting.
Yeah, we had one more question come in about the internship program. Dewan was wondering, are internships remote as well?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So if we're remote as for us as a program, then internships are remote as well. As far as like how we do internships, so that's one of the best things about our program. Like the internship is absolutely it's amazing, and it's such a cool opportunity for our students. And it's really a cool opportunity for all of the tech companies that we partner with, because they have the opportunity to really focus on being good mentors and like building their team and having someone come in that helps them build their onboarding. And a lot of my students will contribute documentation to the company on like how to be better at onboarding, which is really valuable. But when the students go to the internship company, of course, it's very much up to like how that company works. But we vet the company, we make sure that they have what they need, and we also say like our students should be coding for, we say, about 80% of a 40-hour work week. 20, the other 20% is meetings and other things that you have to do as a human working for a company. You don't code 8 hours a day, but it should be coding is the predominant thing. And if we are remote, then the opportunity for the internship is also remote. Some companies, obviously all the companies were remote for a while. Some are moving back into like an office space, and they invite our interns, but our policy is like, you do not have to do that unless it's just something that you want to do. And some people are out of town and can't and just don't, and that's fine too.
And then I just have one more question from Milton. He just had a quick question about our schedule, talking about full-time and what that looks like on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Yeah, this is our setup here. We Monday through Friday, 9 to 5.
And
Um,
then Amanda was just wondering, like, is it, self-directed? Is it a classroom setting? Like, what does the cohort look like?
totally. It's it's very much not self-directed in that we lay out the schedule. It's honestly, we really tried to make it as close to the in-person experience as it was when we were in person. And I mean, I'm pretty biased, but I think we did a good job. Um, we come together every morning as a class. We at 9 o'clock we start class, and everyone is expected to be, camera on, interacting with everybody in the classroom, and we stay that way until 5 o'clock. So we are chatting the whole day. The whole thing is very interactive, and we have a schedule that we follow. We're obviously like flexible in the fact of like every cohort's unique, and so we have a very structured plan, but like day to day we may like change slightly depending on like what the need of the cohort is, or if we have a guest speaker that day. But we're in person virtually. You do not need any textbooks. There are some really cool resources that both book and just like online resources, like PDFs and stuff that I would maybe recommend like looking into, but it's not required to buy any books for the program. Everything you need other than I guess an internet connection is pretty much provided.
Can you expand on that just a second? Because I think one of the awesome things about our program is Git and GitHub, and how our whole
Yeah.
our whole syllabus is on Git and GitHub.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I showed you guys briefly the little like the silly page with the Ewok guy that was on the 404 page. But that is from GitHub, which is an online platform that developers use to share and collaborate on code. And it's something that it's a challenge to learn. There's a lot to it, and a lot of it is text-based commands that you're making directly to your computer. And so it can be kind of a steep learning curve, but we put our curriculum on GitHub to make it available. And then we also put all of our work on GitHub so that we are able to share and collaborate through GitHub. And it really, really helps our students when they move to internships and when they look for jobs, because it's a technology that every developer uses, but it is something that's really hard to learn. And so usually our students are like, have a pretty good leg up on that. And again, it's just like another like tool that we have found to be crucial, especially in our remote environment. But it's again mimicking the idea that like if we were a tech company, this is how we would host our code, and the syllabus and the projects that we're doing in class are our version of that. Yeah, and I mean, we're lucky that we have a pretty good hiring rate. I mean, usually our students that come to learn are very motivated to get jobs, and they work super hard. And we don't guarantee jobs, because I'm not going to guarantee that you are going to get employed. I don't know. I don't have that control. It's every single person has to like get their own job. But obviously what we want to do is make sure that you have everything you need to do that. So, we want to make sure that you have the training and the resources and the portfolio and the ability to write cover letters. And we do a ton of practice with technical interviews and soft skill interviews and informational interviews and networking. And so we really talk about like how to do all of that stuff, but it's up to you ultimately to, go through the hustle and go through the grind of actually getting a job or not. We just want to make sure you're super prepared to do it. And I have students that work during the cohort. Typically, if you're going to work, we really encourage you to be super part-time. I actually stayed at my restaurant job when I took started the Learn bootcamp, but I only worked like once a week. And it was just like enough to keep, like I had budgeted and saved and done all the stuff I needed to do in order to really cut back. But it was just enough to keep a little bit of income that like helped me through the program. And then I was also able to work part-time while I was like initially figuring out my job situation and doing some contract work that was more part-time in the development field. I sort of had that backup of the restaurant, which was really helpful for my situation. But I've had students who've like, you know, driven for Lyft or like done things like that more part-time. I do have a student right now who's working a little bit more full-time, and he is kind of struggling with that because he wants to make more time for studying and it's hard. So could it be done like to work? Just to like throw that out there, like, yes, but our program is just not easy. And I would hate to see someone get burned out. So I really think like figuring out what the best situation is for you is ultimately the goal. And I've also had students who are parents. I have 4 of my students right now have kids that, you know, that sometimes they need to attend to. But again, like, I mean, we're full-time, we're in it in the class, but we also try to take a lot of breaks, and we try to make it reasonable for people to still like be humans and, you know, have appropriate breaks when you need to. So it's hard if it's something that you're getting pulled away with all of the time. Like if you're just not able to sit and like be attentive at your computer, then obviously that's going to be hard, because it's just like this where information is coming at you and then we go and like do challenges and do work. And so I guess again, it's the balance. Yeah, our classroom lectures are recorded for our students' use. We don't like post them anywhere. They're not available for anybody outside of the classroom. It's purely just for our students to be able to see the material again, which is really helpful. But they're not meant to replace lectures. They're just meant to supplement.
Any other last questions we have coming through? Some great questions, by the way. So
Yeah,
appreciate you all asking away. And anybody who actually wants to unmute themselves and ask the question,
Yeah,
you're more than welcome to do that too. Cool. So if that's all we're looking tonight. It's been a lot of fun. We're really all glad you guys showed up. A lot of you guys we've been talking to already, and we're really looking forward to the next class coming up in July. Some of you still plenty of time to think about it. We have some really good opportunities to get you up to speed and some really good ways to get you into the class. So we look forward to hearing you all and seeing all your faces a little bit more. So thank you all for joining us today. I'll reach out with some follow-up information tomorrow. But thank you all and have a great rest of your night.